My name is Kate Marlowe, and I'm 31 years old. Thanksgiving has never been the warm, comforting holiday people describe in movies for me. The food was usually good, sure, but the atmosphere always felt tight, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something unspoken to surface. Smiles were practiced. Conversations felt transactional. Every year I told myself the same lie that family, even when it felt cold or conditional, was still better than being alone. And every year I believed it right up until I regretted it. Growing up, I was never the golden one. That role belonged to my cousin Lillian Harper, my Aunt Denise's daughter. Lillian had the kind of life people like to admire from a distance. Blonde, endlessly upbeat, flawless on paper. Straight A's homecoming queen, now a full-time pet wellness influencer, with a carefully curated online presence, and a golden retriever named Muffin, who somehow had more followers than I did. Denise treated Lillian like royalty, and by extension, the rest of us were expected to orbit around her life, quietly supporting the narrative that she was exceptional. I learned early to keep my distance. When my parents moved out of state during my college years, we slowly fell out of the family holiday rotation. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle. Fewer invites, later texts, eventually silence. But last year, my mother asked me to try again. She said Aunt Denise had invited me for Thanksgiving and that she really hoped I'd go. There was something in her voice, hopeful, maybe even guilty, that made me pause. I hesitated. Denise and I had never been close, and I hadn't seen Lillian in over 5 years. But the truth was, I'd spent the last few holidays alone. At first it felt peaceful. Take out Netflix, no expectations. But after a while, the quiet stopped feeling freeing and started feeling heavy. So I told myself I'd try. One more time. I packed a small bag, a bottle of wine, and a homemade pumpkin pie I was unreasonably proud of. I left Wednesday afternoon and pulled into their driveway just before dinner. The moment I stepped out of the car, I felt it the shift. Not outright hostility, just distance. Denise opened the door with a tight smile, her eyes flicking over me like I was an obligation she hadn't planned for. "Oh, you made it," she said, already turning away. "Lillian's just finishing Muffin's dinner. We're a little behind." I stood there in the entryway, holding the pie and wine like an afterthought. No one took my bag. No one hugged me. Lillian gave me a stiff, one-armed hug, careful not to wrinkle her outfit, while Muffin barked from his oversized dog bed like I was a threat to national security. And just like that, I knew. I wasn't home. I was visiting a place that had never made room for me. The house looked exactly like something out of a Pinterest board titled Perfect Thanksgiving Aesthetic. Every surface was carefully staged in warm tones, burnt orange runners, gold-rimmed candles, little wooden signs with scripted phrases like, "Grateful hearts, gather here." It was beautiful in a way that felt rehearsed, like a showroom rather than a home. Even the air smelled curated cinnamon and clove layered, just enough to feel intentional, not comforting. I set my pie carefully on the kitchen counter, lining it up with the others, like I was submitting it for quiet judgment. Dinner was fine. Not bad enough to complain about, not warm enough to feel welcome. The turkey was moist, the sides were balanced, but the conversation never once settled anywhere that included me. Everything revolved around Muffin. What he was eating now, his skin sensitivities, his anxiety triggers, his brand partnerships. Every story Lillian told circled back to him like we were all just extras in a long-running show about her dog's emotional journey. I tried. I really did. I asked about her work, her travel, what she actually enjoyed outside of her online persona. But every question boomeranged back to Muffin. His feeding schedule, his supplements, his intuition. Eventually, I learned to smile at the right moments and nod like I was listening, even when I wasn't sure how we'd gotten from influencer analytics to goat milk probiotics again. Dessert was the final confirmation. My pie, still warm, carefully wrapped, made from scratch, was sliced once, barely touched. Lillian had made a sugar-free apple tart, pale and dense, and everyone raved about it like it was a culinary breakthrough. Denise complimented it loudly, repeatedly, like she was afraid silence might imply doubt. I swallowed whatever I wanted to say and focused on finishing my water. That night, Denise handed me a pillow and a folded set of sheets, like it was a transaction, not hospitality. "Guest room's upstairs," she said. "Just keep the door closed. Muffin might wander in and get overstimulated. I nodded and carried my things up, exhaustion settling deep into my bones. The room was small but neat. Neutral walls, a dim lamp, a window overlooking the dark backyard. I didn't unpack. I changed into sweats, scrolled through my phone until my eyes burned, and fell asleep before my thoughts could spiral. The barking woke me. It was loud, sharp, relentless. I checked my phone, 6:12 a.m. I tried to ignore it, burying my head under the pillow, but it only escalated. Eventually, I cracked the door open and stepped into the hallway. Lillian stood there, in full yoga gear, diffusing essential oils, while a calming dog routine played on her phone. Muffin paced in tight circles, barking like the world was ending. "Morning," I whispered. She flinched, like I'd shouted. "Could you not stand there?" she snapped. "Muffin senses energy, and your presence is kind of throwing him off." I blinked, unsure how to respond to that without making it worse. I quietly shut the door and stood there for a second, wondering if I'd imagined the exchange. I hadn't. Breakfast was another silent ritual. Muffin was spoon-fed his supplements, while the rest of us ate waffles without conversation. Denise asked me pointed questions about my apartment, my job, whether I was seeing anyone. Each one landed like a reminder that I didn't quite measure up, that my life was something to be politely pitied. I offered to help with dishes just to escape the table, but it wasn't enough. Because by that afternoon, when most of the extended family had arrived, Denise pulled me aside with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Kate, honey," she said softly, "I need to ask you a small favor." And something in her tone told me this house had never made space for me, only room to move me when it was convenient. Denise's hand rested lightly on my arm as she guided me toward the quiet corner of the living room, away from the chatter and the clinking of glasses. Her voice dropped into that careful, apologetic register people use when they already know what they're about to say isn't okay, but they're hoping tone alone will soften the blow. "Kate," she began, sighing gently. "Muffin hasn't been doing very well with all the extra people in the house." I nodded, even though every instinct in me tightened. Of course he wasn't. Everything in this house bent around Muffin's moods. "His anxiety is really spiking," she continued. "He needs a quiet, familiar space to decompress. Lillian's room is his safe space, but we need a backup option in case she needs some time to herself." I waited. I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask questions. I had a feeling I already knew where this was going, and I wanted to hear her say it out loud. "I was hoping," she said, offering a small rehearsed smile, "that you could sleep in your car tonight. Just for tonight." For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "You want me to what?" "It's supposed to be mild," she added quickly. "Like that solved everything. And you drove here, so you have your blankets, right? The guest room just has too much foot traffic. Muffin really needs a calm environment." The words hung there heavy and unreal. "You're asking me to sleep in my car," I said, my voice steady, only because my body had gone numb during Thanksgiving. "In November, when it's storming." Her smile tightened just a fraction. "It's just a simple request," she said. "You're young. You can handle it. Think of it as helping the family. Muffin is part of the family too, after all." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't reconcile what my ears were hearing. "Denise, I said I drove 6 hours to be here. You invited me. I brought wine. I made a pie. And we appreciate that," she cut in too quickly. "But Lillian is very worried about Muffin's stress levels. You know how important he is to her career and her emotional well-being. He's basically her support system." "You're asking me to sleep in a cold car," I said carefully, "so a dog can have my bed." She didn't hesitate, "Just for tonight." That was it. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. Not angry, not loud, just painfully clear. These people didn't see me as family. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't even an inconvenience worth apologizing to properly. I was a movable piece, something to be rearranged when it didn't fit the aesthetic or when Muffin needed a little more space. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I walked upstairs. I packed my bag slowly, deliberately, folded my clothes, zipped my jacket. I walked past the living room, where everyone laughed past Lillian stirring something into Muffin's water without looking up once. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. By the time I reached the car, rain was coming down hard, thunder rolling low in the distance. I pulled out of the driveway without looking back and drove 6 hours straight through the storm. My pie stayed untouched, the wine unopened. And as the road stretched endlessly ahead of me, anger and disbelief settled heavy in my chest, because I finally understood something I'd spent years avoiding. I was never meant to stay. By the time I crossed back into my own state, the storm had settled into a steady, relentless rain. Not dramatic thunder anymore, just the kind that soaks into everything, the kind you can't outrun. The highway was mostly empty headlights blurring into long white streaks ahead of me, and for the first hour I didn't even turn on the radio. I needed the quiet. I needed to hear my own thoughts without anyone interrupting or correcting them. I kept replaying the moment Denise said it. Just for tonight. As if dignity were something you could put on pause, as if discomfort only mattered when it belonged to the right people or the right dog. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, it was close to 3 in the morning. My clothes smelled like rain and car upholstery. I carried my bag inside, kicked off my shoes, and stood there in the dark, longer than necessary, like I wasn't entirely sure what came next. On the kitchen counter sat the pumpkin pie, still wrapped, still perfect. No missing slices, no fingerprints, nothing. I stared at it for a long time. That pie became a symbol I couldn't unsee. 6 hours of driving, careful planning, polite smiles, swallowed comments, all of it reduced to something no one even wanted to taste. Effort offered, effort ignored. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought there would be some kind of emotional release, a breakdown, anything. But instead, I wrapped myself in a blanket, sat on the couch, and just stared, emotionally wrung out, hollow in a way that felt heavier than sadness. For the first time in a long time, I let myself say it plainly. They don't want me there. Not in the dramatic sense, not in the screaming match way, but in the quiet, more painful way, where you're tolerated only as long as you're useful and disposable the second you're not. I didn't call my mother that night. I already knew how the conversation would go. She'd be disappointed, not in me, but in the situation. She always believed people could do better if you gave them time. That family was worth patience. But I'd given time. I'd given effort. I'd given 6 hours on the road and a piece of myself I wasn't sure I had much of left. When I finally did call her the following week, her voice sounded tired before I even finished explaining. "I'm so sorry, Kate," she said quietly. "I really thought things would be different this year." "Yeah," I replied. "Me too." She hesitated, then added, "Denise called. She said you left without saying goodbye. She was confused." I almost laughed. "Confused," I repeated. "She asked me to sleep in my car during a storm so her daughter's dog could have my bed." There was a pause. I told her that was inappropriate, my mom said. "But you know Denise, she doesn't really listen." That was the end of it for a while. December came with gray mornings and early sunsets. I buried myself in work. I ignored the family group chats, which were mostly Lillian posting carefully styled holiday photos of Muffin in elf costumes. Denise tagged me in pictures of their tree, their gratitude exchange, their matching pajamas. Not once did she mention Thanksgiving. Not once did she apologize. I didn't go to Christmas. I didn't even RSVP. I stayed home, made my own dinner, watched an action movie, and drank eggnog straight from the carton. And when the group photos appeared the next morning, everyone smiling around Muffin's stocking station, I didn't feel regret. I felt relief, but that relief didn't last long. Because what I didn't know yet was that my silence wasn't being read as peace. It was being rewritten as guilt. And that's when things started getting dangerous. It started quietly. That's what made it so effective. In mid-January, my phone buzzed with a text from Denise, cheerful, casual, like nothing had happened. "Hi, Kate. Hope you're doing okay. We missed you at Christmas." "Everything all right, Lillian. Was really sad not to see you." I stared at the message longer than I should have. The audacity wasn't loud. It was subtle, carefully worded, as if Thanksgiving had simply evaporated from memory, as if I hadn't been asked to sleep in my car like an afterthought. I typed, deleted, typed again. I figured I wasn't needed. Didn't want to take up space Muffin might need. I hit send. She never replied. A week later, my mother called. I could tell something was wrong before she even said my name. "They're saying you embarrassed the family," she said softly. I blinked. "What?" "Denise told everyone you made a scene," she continued. "That you stormed out over nothing. That you refused to accommodate a simple request and made Lillian cry." I felt something cold slide down my spine. "She's telling people I overreacted," I said slowly. "Yes," my mom admitted. "She said you've been holding a grudge, that you've alienated yourself." Alienated yourself. That phrase lodged itself somewhere deep and sharp. Because I hadn't alienated myself. I hadn't slammed doors or issued ultimatums. I'd simply left when I was asked to accept humiliation as hospitality. But now the story had been flipped so cleanly that even people who weren't there believed it. By February, the shift was unmistakable. My uncle Denise's brother texted me out of the blue. Heard you had a rough holiday. Family's about forgiveness. Don't let pride get in the way. Pride. I let that one sit for a full day before replying. Funny, I thought it was about respect. He never wrote back. By March, invitations turned into announcements. Lillian's having a small brunch for her birthday if anyone wants to stop by. We know Kate's probably busy. That phrase, probably busy, started popping up everywhere like a polite way of erasing me before I could speak. And behind every message, I could feel it: judgment, condescension, a collective agreement that I was difficult, dramatic, too sensitive. And the worst part, no one ever asked me what actually happened. They didn't want clarity, they wanted cohesion, and cohesion required a villain. I stopped responding altogether, not out of spite, but out of instinct. I needed to understand what was happening before I reacted, and that's when I noticed the pattern. Denise's social media posts shifted tone. Family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up. Protect your energy from toxic relatives. Lillian shared posts about mental health and boundaries, about choosing peace, about healing from people who don't respect emotional needs. Every caption felt like it was aimed directly at me, carefully, vague, perfectly curated. Even extended relatives, people I barely knew, started treating me differently. Short replies, polite distance. That look people give you when they think they already know your side of the story. I had been erased and replaced by a version of me that was bitter, uncooperative, selfish. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more solid that version became. So I stopped ignoring it. I started collecting screenshots, messages, invitations, social posts. I didn't comment. I didn't confront. I watched. Because if there's one thing people who twist the truth have in common, it's that they get sloppy. And Denise, she was very sloppy. I didn't know yet what I would do with any of it. I just knew one thing, with absolute clarity. If I didn't protect the truth, someone else would bury it. And that was when I learned about the trip. I found out about the trip the same way I found out about everything else, through a carefully filtered lie dressed up as gratitude. It was early summer when Lillian posted the reel. Slow motion footage of her and Muffin walking along a private beach, ukulele music layered over the sound of waves. The caption read, "Grateful for quiet escapes after a year full of emotional drama." Hashtags followed. Healing, hashtag protected energy, hashtag pet influencer life. I didn't need her to tag me. I knew exactly who that was for. A few days later, my mom called. She hesitated before speaking, which was never a good sign. "I think they're going to Europe," she said. "Who, Denise? Lillian, everyone." I paused when Thanksgiving. There it was. The holiday I'd driven 6 hours to salvage, the one I'd been pushed out of, the one they'd rewritten until I was the problem. And now they were going to sip wine somewhere picturesque and post captions about family and gratitude like I'd never existed. "They didn't invite you?" my mom asked quietly. "No," I said, "they didn't." I thought I'd be angrier than I was. Instead, what I felt was a dull, heavy understanding. This wasn't just exclusion anymore. It was replacement. They hadn't just pushed me aside, they'd filled the space with something shinier and pretended it was always meant to be that way. And then came the real blow. It was October when my mom called again, her voice tight with worry. "They're asking about the property," she said. My stomach dropped. My grandfather had passed away 3 years earlier. Most of his estate had been settled quietly, but there was one thing left unresolved, a small property upstate that had been left to the grandchildren, me, Lillian, and our younger cousin, Ben. Equal shares. Clear language. No ambiguity. "What about it?" I asked. "Denise wants Lillian to have full ownership," my mom said carefully. "She's saying you've distanced yourself from the family, that you wouldn't use it." I felt my jaw clench. So now I don't deserve what he left me. "She's pitching it as practical," my mom continued. "Says Lillian could turn it into a wellness retreat." Of course she could. That was the moment I stopped observing and started planning. Because this wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. This was about entitlement, about rewriting history on paper, the same way they'd done socially, quietly, confidently, assuming I wouldn't push back. For a while, I let it sit, let it eat at me. The lies, the way my name had become shorthand for inconvenience. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being misunderstood repeatedly by people who should know you best. It doesn't explode, it erodes. Rock bottom didn't look dramatic. It looked like unread messages, like waking up and realizing you didn't feel like calling anyone, like scrolling through family photos and feeling like you were looking at strangers who'd already decided who you were. One night I caught myself thinking, maybe I'm not worth the effort. That thought scared me more than Denise ever had. Because it wasn't true. I had shown up. I had tried. I had chosen dignity when they offered humiliation. And somehow that had been framed as selfishness. The clarity of that realization was sharp and grounding. It was the first spark. The second came when I found an old photo on my phone Thanksgiving 2 years earlier. Me and my mom on my tiny apartment balcony store-bought turkey sandwiches, hot cider mismatched blankets. We laughed, played cards, watched terrible movies. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. That photo reminded me who I actually was. Not the version Denise narrated, not the problem child they whispered about, but the woman who showed up when it mattered, who made space even when it wasn't returned. That was when I stopped asking whether I should fight back and started deciding how. I didn't announce anything. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't send a single clarifying message or demand an explanation. Instead, I turned inward, not in a defeated way, but in a deliberate one. If they were going to keep rewriting who I was, then the first thing I needed was to remember it myself. I started with my body, because it was the one thing I still had full control over. I joined a small gym near my apartment. Not one of those intimidating mirror-lined places where everyone pretends not to look at you, but a quiet space where the trainers actually learned your name. That's where I met Marco, a former physical therapist turned coach, who didn't bark commands or chase aesthetics. He watched how I moved, how I held my shoulders, how I breathed. "You're carrying a lot of tension up here," he said one day, pressing lightly between my shoulders while I was struggling through a plank. "Family stuff," I muttered. He nodded like he'd heard it 1,000 times. "The body keeps score. We'll work on both." Every workout left me exhausted but grounded. I wasn't trying to punish myself or transform overnight. I was trying to feel solid again, capable, present. With each session, something shifted. I stood a little straighter. I slept a little better. I trusted my own instincts a little more. Then I turned to work. I'd been coasting for a while, doing well enough to stay invisible. But with the energy I wasn't spending on family anxiety anymore, I started picking up freelance projects. Small brands, local creatives, people who wanted more than surface-level engagement. I redesigned a website for a nonprofit that paired therapy dogs with veterans, helped a local artist launch an online shop. The irony didn't escape me, but I didn't dwell on it. People noticed. My boss called me into a meeting in late November, almost exactly a year after that Thanksgiving. "You've been doing incredible work lately," she said. "There's a senior strategist role opening up. I think you should apply." I didn't hesitate. "I will," I said, and meant it. Still, the ghost of what they'd done lingered. Not because I missed them, but because I hated that they thought they were right, that they'd told the story so many times they believed it. I didn't need revenge. I needed clarity. I needed the truth preserved somewhere safe. So I went back through everything. Texts, emails, social posts. I created a folder on my laptop and named it Muffingate, because if I didn't laugh, I'd lose my mind. Inside it, I organized everything neatly. Denise's Thanksgiving invitation, my RSVP, her message about the favor, my messages to my mom after I left, screenshots of the passive-aggressive posts that followed, a PDF of my grandfather's will highlighting the clause about the property being shared equally among the grandchildren. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was organizing my reality. By early November, the pain hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was quieter, stronger. I didn't need them to validate me. I didn't need an invitation to prove my worth. I knew who I was now. So when Denise sent a group message, thinking of everyone during our Europe trip this Thanksgiving, wishing you all peace, love, and family connection, I didn't flinch. I looked out my window at the gray sky and smiled. For the first time, I wasn't trying to earn a seat at their table. I was building my own. And then the letter arrived. It arrived 2 days before Thanksgiving, tucked neatly into my mailbox like it belonged there. Crisp white envelope. My name typed in careful, elegant lettering. No return address. I stood in the hallway of my building for a full minute before opening it, already knowing deep down that whatever was inside wasn't meant to reconnect or reconcile. It was meant to pressure. The letter was from a lawyer, Denise's lawyer. The language was polite, almost warm. It thanked me for my time, acknowledged recent tensions, and then gently suggested that I consider doing the right thing by relinquishing my interest in the family property so Lillian could take full ownership and move forward with her healing retreat. No threats, no deadlines, just a request carefully framed as generosity. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so transparent. If they'd had legal power, they would have used it. This wasn't a demand, it was a test, a belief that I was still the same woman who would quietly step aside to keep the peace. I left the letter on my kitchen table for 2 days. Didn't text my mom, didn't spiral. I let it sit there like a fire I finally knew how to control. There was a time when that envelope would have broken me, when I would have questioned myself, wondered if I was being selfish, wondered if letting go would just be easier. But now I saw it clearly. They weren't asking because it was fair. They were asking because they were scared I wouldn't disappear quietly. I called my mom that night. I got the letter, I said calmly. She exhaled sharply. I was afraid of that. Please don't do anything rash. I'm not, I replied. I'm going to do something smart. And I did. I pulled up Muffingate and organized it into clean sections, correspondence, social posts, the will messages, timelines. I highlighted inconsistencies, saved backups. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was logistical. Then I called Ben. We hadn't talked in a while, but he picked up on the third ring. Kate, he said, surprised. Wow, it's been a minute. Too long, I replied. You got time. We talked for nearly an hour. I told him everything Thanksgiving. The car, the months of quiet erasure, and now the letter. He laughed in disbelief at first. She really asked you to sleep outside for a dog during a storm. Yes, I said. What is wrong with these people? Then I got to the point. They're trying to edge me out of the property. What he said immediately. No, that's not right. I'm not giving it up, I said. Not because I need it, but because I'm not letting them rewrite this again. There was a pause. Then, tell me what you need. That was the moment I realized something else had shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally. Someone else who saw the pattern for what it was, not family conflict, but coordinated exclusion dressed up as concern. The next morning, I asked a lawyer friend from work, Sarah, to help me draft a response. It was brief, professional, unemotional. Thank you for your letter dated November 20th. At this time, I am not willing to cede my legal interest in the property left to me by my grandfather. I trust this decision will be respected. I sent it certified mail. Then I looked up the property for the first time in years. It wasn't the rundown cabin I'd imagined. It was a 2-bedroom cottage on nearly 3 acres, surrounded by pines overlooking a quiet lake. Dated, yes, but solid, valuable, and recently rezoned according to the planning office. Prime land for a retreat. Or something else. Something that didn't involve pretending I didn't exist. That's when I stopped reacting entirely and started building a future they couldn't control. I didn't rush into anything after sending that letter. That was the part of me that had changed the most. I no longer moved out of panic or the need to prove something. I moved with intention, with facts, with patience. And patience, I learned, made people like Denise deeply uncomfortable. The first thing I did was actually learn the property. Not the fantasy version Lillian had built in her head, but the real one. I pulled up zoning records, tax assessments, planning notes. The land had been quietly rezoned months earlier. There were whispers about short-term rental expansion in the area, even small grants for restorative retreats tied to veterans and trauma recovery. Suddenly, it was obvious why Denise was pushing so hard and why she'd waited until she thought I was sufficiently distant to make her move. I drove up there for the first time in years on a gray October weekend. The cottage wasn't glamorous. The floorboards creaked, the plumbing complained, the fireplace hadn't been used in ages, but the bones were solid, just like Kevin, the semi-retired contractor I hired, said they would be. He walked the property with me, slowly pointing things out, never rushing. Needs work, he said, but it's honest work. Someone loved this place once. That sentence stuck with me. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not Denise, not Lillian, not even my mom at first. I filed paperwork quietly transferring my share of the property into a personal LLC. Perfectly legal, perfectly clean. I notified the estate executor and confirmed my rights. I was no longer just a name in a document. I was active, present, impossible to ignore. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. Kate Denise, said her voice suddenly syrupy. We got your letter. I was hoping we could talk. Really talk. I let her, for 10 full minutes. She talked about legacy, about family, about Lillian's vision. She actually cried about how much Lillian had already invested emotionally. Then came the offer. If there's any number, she said carefully, anything you'd accept just to walk away peacefully, we'd love to make that happen. That was when I knew. They weren't asking because they cared. They were asking because they were afraid that the truth, once anchored in legal reality, couldn't be reshaped with hashtags and pity. "I'm not selling," I said calmly, "and I'm not stepping aside." The silence on the other end was sharp. "You've always been difficult," Denise snapped, the mask finally slipping. "Always sulking. Always making things harder than they need to be." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it, and yet I said I was always the one who showed up. She hung up. By the time Thanksgiving came around again, I didn't feel dread. I felt ready. I planned my own Thanksgiving. Nothing elaborate. Just me, my mom and Ben, who flew in without hesitation. We spent the holiday at the cottage, our cottage. We lit the fireplace, made a simple meal. I baked another pumpkin pie, and this time I watched people actually eat it. We talked, really talked. My mom shared stories about her father bringing her and Denise there as kids. Ben admitted he'd always felt Lillian's life was a performance polished to the point of emptiness. I laughed genuinely for the first time in years. And then as the sun dipped and snow dusted the trees, we heard a car on the gravel road. I knew it before I even looked. The black SUV moved slowly up the dirt road like it was unsure it was still welcome. When it stopped, Denise stepped out first, wrapped in a perfectly tailored camel-colored coat. Lillian followed, dressed in white hair, curled like she was heading to a photo shoot. Muffin wasn't with them. That surprised me. I opened the door before they could knock, not to invite them in, but to make it clear I wasn't hiding. Kate Denise said brightly. We were in the area. You drove 6 hours to be in the area, I replied. She cleared her throat. We wanted to see the property. It's been such a long time, and we were hoping for a civil conversation. Just us. No lawyers. Lillian stepped forward, holding out a plastic container. We brought muffins. Banana walnut, I murmured. Fitting. Ben appeared beside me, then leaning casually against the doorframe. The flicker on Denise's face was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. She hadn't expected him. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, so my mom wouldn't have to hear what came next. Denise folded her arms. Lillian has big plans for this place. Sponsors, branding consultants. It could be something incredible. Peace for who I asked. She blinked. You didn't care about peace when you asked me to sleep in my car during a thunderstorm. I continued calmly. You didn't care when you rewrote the story to make me the problem. And you didn't care when you tried to remove me from something my grandfather explicitly left to me. You're being dramatic, Denise said sharply. No, I replied. I'm being accurate. Lillian stepped forward. We just thought it would mean more to someone who could actually use it. I didn't flinch. I am using it. I handed her a folder. Inside was a lease agreement, my lease. I'd committed the property to a local nature therapy nonprofit that worked with veterans and trauma survivors. Real healing, real people, no influencers, no branding deals. Ben added quietly, and I've officially transferred my share to Kate's LLC. Lillian's face drained of color. This was supposed to be mine, she whispered. No, I said gently. It was supposed to be ours. You just assumed no one would push back. Denise looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. You'll regret this. I already regretted giving you the benefit of the doubt, I replied. This feels like closure. They didn't argue. They didn't scream. They just left. I went back inside. Ben raised a mug of cider. My mom hugged me tightly. And as I sat by the fire that night, I felt something settle into place. Not revenge, not triumph. Peace. They say revenge is best served cold. But sometimes it's best served quietly by refusing to disappear, by choosing dignity, and by building a life so solid that the people who tried to erase you can never rewrite it again.